I have a problem. Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and it's the end of the year, and you know what that means. It's time to pick my game of the year. 2024, though, is a little bit weird in that regard. A lot, and I mean a lot of great games came out this year. I think it's been an amazing, phenomenal year for video games. And at the end of it all, I find it really hard to decide what my favorite game this year is. But I think I settled on what my answer is. I think I have two Game of the Years. Now, I know that sounds a bit like a cop-out, because let's be honest, it kind of is. But it's also my channel, and I make the rules. So, going into 2024, I didn't think these two games would not only exceed my expectations, but arguably go into my top 10 games of all time, because I love these games so very much. And if you saw the thumbnail, you probably know the two games I'm referring to. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Metaphor Refantazio. The latest and greatest from Square Enix and Atlus, two of my favorite developers out there. And in this video, instead of doing the typical Game of the Year type of wrap-up, where I make everything competitive, this year I just want to talk about why these two games are so special to me, why I love them so much, and instead of feeling the need to pit them against each other, I want to just talk about how great these games are. So let's do that. Why are these games specifically my Game of the Year, my co-Game of the Years for 2024? Well, let's get into it, and let's start with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, a game that in my opinion is one of the best games out there that best exemplifies that a game doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs its strengths to overshadow, and vastly overshadow at that, its faults. Because Rebirth has a lot of faults. And I mean a lot. It has way too much Chadley yapping. The animations to maneuver around the environment take way too much time. I don't know why there isn't a jump button. Some of the minigames control like crap, like Chocobo Flying in Cosmo Canyon or the Tifa sit-up game. Though, let's be fair here, no one's actually paying attention how to do that minigame. The Kate Sith dungeon is diabolically bad. And funnily enough, Rebirth is one of those games that is capable of frustrating me more so than a lot of other games. And it is easy to get frustrated at these elements and become a bit blinded by how much good that this game actually does have. Because it does do a lot right. It is an excellent iteration on the remake combat system, and the addition of synergy skills and abilities are a beautiful addition that rounds out the combat. It adds so much extra depth and potential tools and answers that just smooths over the entire experience. Like, you can play the game without utilizing these things, but good God, does it become far more smoother and, in my opinion, more enjoyable by utilizing these new tools that the game gives you. And there are a bunch of great minigames. I love the dolphin riding. I love most of the things in the Gold Saucer. Even in Costa del Sol, playing bootleg Rocket League with Red 13 is hilarious. And I think they did an amazing job of making this world feel like Final Fantasy VII. It's big and over-the-top and wacky and just silly, with a bunch of over-the-top characters to go alongside all these wacky minigames. And it juxtaposes all of that with really cutting and emotional scenes, just like Final Fantasy VII. It does a beautiful job of blending these two extremes. And the game has a great sense of non-linearity and openness, and coming off of remake, that was sorely needed. And it makes sense because that was how the original Final Fantasy VII was structured and presented. That original Midgar section, which is what Final Fantasy VII Remake was composed of and fleshed out, was hyperlinear. By design, it was meant to feel claustrophobic because you're in this jam-packed city. And then when you leave Shinra territory, when you leave Midgar, you're exposed to this wide open world. And as you continue playing the game, it becomes wider and bigger. And that is the feeling that Rebirth elicits. The bosses and fight design and enemy design are all a step up from Remake to me. And you pair that with the great iterations to the combat loop that we just talked about, and it all creates a whole greater than the sum of its parts. One of my favorite phrases. And Queen's Blood is absolutely fantastic. I'm a big fan of The Witcher 3, and it provides that same break in flow and gameplay that Gwent provided in Witcher 3, because Queen's Blood has a shocking amount of depth. And funnily enough, that can be said for most things in this game. What would ordinarily be one-off minigames have a shocking amount of depth to them, and a lot you can really sink your teeth into. I spent so many hours doing chocobo racing, with all the different courses and obstacles in your way. Sure, it got frustrating at times, but I had like pretty much chocobo racing, the other game, in this game, on top of all the other minigames, because most of them have that same level of depth to at least some degree. And I think the beautiful balance that this game is able to strike, because it also has an entire rhythm game with the piano system, which takes a minute to get used to, but when you do get used to it, it feels super satisfying to nail. And the general rule of thumb with this game is that, especially in regards to, say, a minigame, if it's required, then it's very simple and rather easy to do for the most part. It's mostly introducing you to that type of content. And if you want to go for a 100% playthrough, or you enjoy that piece of content enough and want to get all the rewards from it, that's when you can really interface with all of these minigames and sink your teeth into them. And that's when they can get really hard. And for some of them, kind of annoying. But if you don't do that, then you simply identify and pick and choose what you enjoy and ignore the rest after testing it out. You combine all of this with one of my favorite casts of any game ever. I am an unabashed lover of Final Fantasy VII, and I love the remake, and I love Rebirth. There is so much content, and good content at that, in Rebirth. Is it a perfect game? Absolutely not. Are there a lot of things I hope they improve with in regards to the third game? Absolutely. 100,000%. Do I think any of them are in regards to the story? Myself? Not really. I loved it. Beginning, middle, and end. I loved every character. I loved all the plot reveals. I loved every plot point. The voice acting was absolutely stellar, just as it was in Remake. The characters have a lot of depth. I love these new scenes we get with Remake and Rebirth that build off of each other. It brings so much more life and animation into these characters that I fell in love with back when I played the original Final Fantasy VII so many years ago. I still listen to No Promises to Keep all the time. It's a great song, and the soundtrack overall for this game is legit a 10 out of 10, especially when you get into the nitty-gritty of the music theory behind it all, because it's enjoyable to listen to by itself, but when you have certain things be identified to you, there's so many cool little twists that happen with the music in this game. And the funny thing is 2024 has kind of shown me that my gaming preferences are shifting and changing a bit. I'm valuing puzzle solving a bit more, and not just like bashing my skull against a wall repeatedly. I'm taking the time to analyze a situation and utilize what I can to overcome an obstacle. I am prioritizing gameplay a bit more and caring a bit more about it than I used to. And like, I can be a really stubborn gamer sometimes, and I swear this is important for when we get to Metaphor. But when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, normally what I liked to do when it came to materia loadouts was just get the abilities in the materia that I tend to like, equip them, and then largely forget about them. But in Rebirth, you are highly incentivized, especially when you go after harder content, to mix and match, to swap out various things, suit your materia loadout for the situation. And there's really cool things that you can pull off by doing so in this game, especially with the elemental materia, where you can just completely nullify elemental based attacks, supposing you're able to identify what the element the enemy is going to use and then build accordingly. It's a game that rewards flexible thinking and flexible playstyle, and all the characters feel so satisfying and good to use. In my original playthrough of Rebirth, I didn't play as Aerith that much because she wasn't that entertaining to me. I've been playing the game a little bit again and trying to use Aerith a bit more, and she's so powerful. I'm ordinarily now a bit better at parrying and dodging than I was at the beginning of the year, and while I tried to go back and do a hard mode playthrough of Rebirth, I realized, one, I'm way too underleveled, but also I don't have certain materia leveled up accordingly that I should if I'm going to go into hard mode. And it's kind of made me excited for the eventual, at least I hope, PC port of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Because look, the PS5 version's a bit rough around the edges. There's a reason they hyped up the PS5 Pro version of this game so much, and I really want to play this game again. Kind of with this shifted mindset that I have developed over the course of this year when it comes to gaming in general and just what I want out of gaming. And then I want to do a hard mode playthrough of this game, kind of just for personal satisfaction, just to see how far I've come. Because I tried fighting Midgard Soma on hard mode earlier today, but again, I'm way too underleveled and I don't have the right materia, and that dude was just like two-shotting me. And his fire attack just one-shot my entire party repeatedly. So it's something I'm looking forward to, because I love this game, and it can frustrate me and annoy me like no other, but it is able to elicit and draw out those emotions for me. And the positive feelings that I have for this game wildly overshadow them. Some of my favorite games I've ever played are games that are deeply flawed, but despite those faults, I can see and understand and appreciate the brilliance that is there. Rebirth is one of those games. Now let's talk about Metaphor Refantazio. I am a big Persona fan. Metaphor Refantazio is essentially medieval Persona with Shin Megami Tensei combat. Not only does it arguably do the Persona formula the best for me, but it also got me into the press turn icon system. Essentially, the way turns are done in Shin Megami Tensei. You get a set number of turn icons each round, and depending upon what you do, you manipulate that number pretty much. If you miss an attack, you may lose 2 turn icons. If you hit an enemy's weakness, you may retain your turn icon. If you pass, you lose half a turn icon, stuff like that. And there's a shocking amount of depth and just enjoyment that you can get out of this system that I've been getting out of this system with Metaphor Refantazio, because it's a blend of elements of game design, namely from Shin Megami Tensei, that I wasn't sure if I was going to like, but I fell in love with, and the game drew me in with familiar elements because I'm a fan of Persona. And remember what I talked about when it came to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and how, like, that game, and also me replaying Dark Souls 1 and Elden Ring, but, like, Rebirth is kind of like that initial step for me to, like, shift my way of thinking when I'm playing a game away from being way too inflexible to being more flexible in my approach. Metaphor is kind of like the payoff for that, because the archetype system is so bloody brilliant in this game. The archetypes are essentially classes. You unlock them as the game goes on and as you find new and new characters, and you equip archetypes onto various party members. And the cool thing is, you can inherit skills from other archetypes. So say for Stroll, I can level up his warrior, but if I also level up Commander, I can inherit skills from Commander for Stroll, so he can use them while being warrior. There's so many different archetypes in this game, and that makes it so you have so many different possibilities for party composition and ways to tackle and solve the problems that the game provides you. Because the game, and this is pretty much the MO for Metaphor Refantazio's combat, the game will throw bullcrap at you sometimes, and it will feel overwhelming. But the beauty of this game is that you can be bullcrap yourself and throw out outrageously powerful things. It's hilarious. I can make sure that the first party member that I have to go in a fight has an ability called Faker's Roguery from the Faker archetype. What this does is pretty much a dice roll. And if I get the right numbers, I gain additional turn icons, or I lose them or lose all of them. But if they go first in the party lineup, because the game lets you just restart a fight to the beginning of the fight whenever you want to, I can just cheese it at the beginning of a fight to get 3 or 4 additional turn icons, consume a piece of food you get near the end of the game to gain an additional 4 on top of that, and then use an ability that the MC gets to gain an additional 4 turn icons. So I'm just running the gauntlet, and it's hilarious how much you can cheese this game, and it's so satisfying to do so. I got an unscathed triumph on the Fire super boss in this game, which at least my chat told me was considered to be the hardest super boss. Dude didn't even touch me. Like, being able to pull that stuff off feels so good and rewarding, because you can't do it all the time because it's wildly MP inefficient. But when you do manage to pull it off, good God, it's a power play. And it works so well because the general flow of the combat, the customization, and the execution of the combat is so super satisfying and fun. Building and customization are great, and the progression loop you get in this game is also incredible. When you max out an archetype so they can no longer gain XP, you still gain XP on a level up for that archetype. It just gets transferred into an item that you can consume for a different archetype. From like head to toe, this game reeks of, they clearly played this game a lot internally and asked themselves, how could we make this better? How could we make this smoother? How can we make this more intuitive? And it's a bunch of little design like that XP system I just talked about that makes the game so much more fun and rewarding. And it has decently creative main dungeons that keep the focus on the combat because it's so good, but also the storytelling and the world building, which is some of Atlus's finest work. And the game, the best aspect to Metaphor Refantazio, by far, is the pacing. The pacing of the story, the pacing of character development, the pacing of progression when it comes to the combat, of leveling up various archetypes and characters. The pacing overall in this game is so good. The game utilizes a calendar-based system from Persona. What does this mean? Well, the game is broken up into various days that have a day part and an evening part, and you can do various activities in those time slots. To progress your character, you can level up follower ranks so that party members may gain additional inheritance skill slots or additional abilities, etc., etc. Level up your royal virtues to allow you to do various different activities or quests. Take part in the Colosseum and fight various different challenges to go up the ranking. Complete a whole host of side quests and side dungeons. There's a lot to do, and it's so brilliantly paced. I got done with pretty much everything I wanted to with about 2 in-game days remaining. The game is just so very well constructed and well paced throughout. The Gauntlet Runner is an amazing mechanic because going to a certain location in this game takes up certain amount of in-game time, but they don't just like fast forward you a couple of days. You can do various activities on the Gauntlet Runner that you couldn't do ordinarily. So it feels like a mini road trip. Certain followers can only progress a certain rank by being on the Gauntlet Runner. There's a whole host of activities you can only do on the Gauntlet Runner. You can cook on the Gauntlet Runner, level up a follower to gain speed cooking so that cooking doesn't take up any time, and the cooking things are so powerful in this game, and they smooth over a lot of rough edges this game could have had, but because they clearly played and tested this game, the game just doesn't have them. Like, my one main issue is that MP management in like the first half of this game can be kind of annoying, because either you have to waste a bunch of days in game to go back to camp and rest up, or swap over to mage and just grind it out. Otherwise, you have to be wildly efficient because some of these dungeons go on for a while. But as you gain more and more items to regenerate MP, or you cook more dishes that regenerate MP, stuff like that, it becomes far more manageable in the later half, especially as the archetypes where you can pump out a lot of damage, like with the Merchant family or the Brawler family. Merchant has skills that deal a lot of damage, but they cost money, not MP. Brawler has skills that cost HP instead of MP, and you can utilize those skills or inherit them onto other archetypes for your party members, by the way, to be even more MP efficient. That's what I love about this game. A lot of the design that I had to kind of learn the hard way back in my Rebirth playthrough, I was able to really appreciate here in my Metaphor playthrough. And that's one of the really special things about this year in gaming for me, is that for me, I had a bit of a journey in that regard. And it's also, I think, why I struggled so much with picking just one of these games. Because the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, I really like these games arguably equally. Like, to the point where, if you asked me one day from the other, my answer would probably change. It's been a stellar year for gaming. And I know pessimism can be very rampant in modern gaming. I understand that, because I feel it from time to time as well. I do think it's important, though, to take stock of all the good that can happen in a year, especially for gaming. How many great games can come out, and I don't feel the inherent need to pit these games against each other to try and tear each other down, rather than build both of these games up, alongside a whole host of other great games. These are just my 2 favorite games of 2024. I loved Astrobot. I loved Stellar Blade. I loved Black Myth Wukong. I loved Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree. I loved Persona 3 Reload. There's a bunch of great games. I'm looking forward to Indiana Jones. So I think this year, more so than others, I want to just take a moment to appreciate these great games. Metaphor Refantazio provided to me one of the best twists on one of my favorite franchises I've ever seen, with some of the best execution I've ever seen. One of my favorite stories paired with one of my favorite casts of any game I've ever played, alongside a combat system that has gotten me into Shin Megami Tensei at this point. I love Metaphor Refantazio unabashedly. I love that game from top to bottom. And the only couple of issues that I have with the game are very minor in the grand scheme of things. I think the side dungeons are a bit repetitive and could use some more visual diversity. And MP management in the first half is a bit rough. Like, that's pretty much it, though. The game has some weird performance issues in the Gauntlet Runner, but, like, besides that, it's like, that's it. Everything else I adore about this game. The character development. They develop characters that you would never think for a million years they would take the time to actually develop and give a whole lot of love to, but they do. Dude, they gave development to Batlin, a guy who would just be around to yap about recent events for the entire game if this was any other game, but here they gave him a great arc. It didn't have to be long or flashy, but it was effective and useful, and it added to the world, and they do this with pretty much every character. This game is so smart in its writing, and it knows when it needs to be nuanced and subtle, and when it needs to be upfront and direct, and it has both in equal, beautiful measure. I love Metaphor Refantazio, and I think the best way to describe Metaphor Refantazio and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for me is that Metaphor Refantazio is more consistent for me, whereas Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a bit more spiky in terms of my enjoyment with it. But I love these games and I love what they do, and I can't wait to go back to these games in years to come, look back on these games and appreciate them and play them even more and appreciate them even more then. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Leave a comment down below with what your favorite game of the year has been, or if you're like me and you have a couple and you just can't pick, it's your comment and your list. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe. Have a great day. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.